Welcome to Bike World. Thanks to coronavirus and lockdown, we haven't been able to get out and test and bring you anything new, so we've decided to take a look back at two of our favourite features from the last 5 or 6 years. I've picked my ride on the Ducati Multistrada Enduro in Italy. Beautiful location, incredible bike, had loads of fun. But first off, we're going back to 2014, Chris Northover on a Ducati Superleggera, racing a Mclaren P1 and a Porsche 918.
Going fast is awesome, right? Doesn't matter whether you're in a car or on a bike, a roller coaster when you're a kid. You know, we all love going fast. Obviously, here at Bike World, we're keen on bikes. Autocar, a couple of our friends, obviously their thing is cars. And for as long as I can remember, we've had phone calls back and forth between, you know, them at Autocar, us at Bike World, us at Superbike. Always, oh, what have you got? We'll race you with this. We've got this. We'll race you with that. And for as long as I can remember now, we've been doing these car versus bike events. We haven't lost one yet, and I don't intend to let that happen now. We've raced an aerial atom, we've raced a rallycross car, we've raced around circuits, we've raced in straight lines, and every single time they come up with this new foolproof formula where they're going to kick our backsides, they're going to pace us because they've got X amount of horsepower and four-wheel drive this. I don't mean to be smug, obviously it's not me that does it, it's the bike, but every single time the bike's proved quicker. This time I was a little nervous. They phoned me up, they've got the new McLaren P1, they've got the new Porsche 918 Spider. Now, for those who are not into cars, those are the best two cars that you can buy right now. They are unreal. So both of these cars, petrol motors and electric motors, combined, it's more for torque filling. So it's not like some shitty Prius where you're trying to get your fuel economy up. The electric motor fills in the gaps in the torque from the petrol motor. These things are fast. So Steve Sutcliffe from Autocar phones me up. We've got these two cars, what have you got? Straight line race, Brunton-Thorpe Airfield. I'll be honest, I had to blag and say, oh yeah, I've got something that's going to smash them. In the back of my head, I had no idea what to take. Those cars are quick, and you know, we've won the last 3 races, but they've never quite turned up with big guns like these. After a few phone calls, I managed to get hold of the most expensive superbike you can currently get, and the highest performance on paper, which is the new Ducati Superleggera, £54,000 worth of bike. It looks initially like it's a fancy pants, rich man's toy, not much different to this Panigale, but believe me, when you start delving into the specs, it is exquisite. It's got a balanced crank, it's got high compression pistons, it's got the compressions massively higher than the standard road bike. It has a magnesium frame, a carbon fiber subframe. Like every little bit of that bike is different to a Panigale, despite the fact they look the same. You know, there's so much development gone into it. And actually, I started getting excited. I thought, you know what, I might just win this one. So we headed over to Brunton-Thorpe for a straight line race, £2 million supercars, 150 grand Panigale. So Superleggera, it's not an ordinary bike, you know, this is a limited run bike. You know, they were kind of invitation only to buy them. You don't just turn up to Ducati UK or a dealer and say, hey, can we borrow one of those? We're going to go and race it down a runway. We had a little bit of fun and games trying to get hold of one. In the end, through Ducati UK, we managed to sort out one off a guy called Steve Forster, who was really, really kind and agreed to lend us his bike for the day. And this, you know, this isn't a dealer. This isn't a press bike where they know they're getting. This is this guy's personal bike that he bought because he loved it. He rides at the weekend. It's his little baby, and he was kind enough to say, yeah, you know what, go and smash those cars with my bike. Pressure or what? We turn up to a few of these things now, and you get there and there's always some sniffing around from either party. So we rocked up to Brunton-Thorpe, wheeled this Superleggera out the van, And bearing in mind, these are the guys that were there from Autocar, there were guys from Mclaren and Porsche. These are people that spend their lives hanging around £750,000, £1 million cars. You know, the guys from McLaren, you know, they live in, you know, cars over £500,000, so they don't touch anything cheaper than that, really. And these guys all stopped what they were doing and just came over to stare at the Ducati, and it was like silence. Everyone was just open-mouthed. It has that much of an impact when you roll it out of a van. Then I hit the start button and it sounded like hell had just escaped. It is loud. All of the Superleggeras come with a race kit, so you get a different exhaust, a different map for the ECU, blanking plates to take your mirrors off on a big screen, paddock stands, stuff like that. The exhaust is an Akrapovic full system, releases another 5 horsepower, so you're up to 205 plus horsepower at the brochure, and about 1 million decibels. I didn't measure it exactly, but it's close to that. It was quite funny, you know, seeing the impact that bike had. When, yeah, 50 grand to us bike guys is a ton of cash, but to those guys, 50 grand, there's a couple of sets of tyres for their cars, but it still stopped them all. It was real funny. Usually when we do these Autocar things, there's a specific target, like a 0 to 100 to 0, or a lap of a track, or, you know, there's various statistics that Steve from Autocar or I will have come up with that we go, right, this is our goal today. This one was a little different, and, you know, we kind of had this 200 mile an hour idea in our heads, but we kind of didn't think there's not many bikes that will actually top 200 miles an hour. There's no production bike that will top 200 miles an hour currently. So the way the days run is we'll start at one end of the runway, started with one car, put all the data equipment in it, a couple of speed runs from, you know, dead start, fast as you can, up to as fast as the car will go down the runway, move on to the next one, jump on the bike, move on to the next one, jump into the other car. And then we'll do a load of other shots for the TV stuff, so we just muck around, pulling wheelies and just kind of showcasing what each of the vehicles can do, which consists of Steve doing massive smoky drifts in expensive cars and me wheeling bikes up and down the runway until they tell me to stop. It's not a bad day all in all. There's no substitute for all lining up in a line and then launching down the runway to see kind of what ends up where.
So close. 918 is 4-wheel drive, so it gets off the line better. I can't see either of them. There's the bike. Oh my God!
But perhaps the most surreal experience I have ever had was being on that Superleggera, absolutely flat out on the stop, tucked on the tank, so much noise, everything's shaking, you're heading towards a big jet at the far end of the runway, and there you are, 192 mile an hour, and a McLaren goes past you on that side, makes you jump. What the hell was that? And then a couple of seconds later, a Porsche. When you look at all three vehicles doing the launch here, you can see here off the line, the Porsche is unreal. You know, that's a 4-wheel drive car, 4 wheels, four lots of traction. That thing off the line was untouchable. You know, however good a launch I got on the bike, I was never ever far ahead of the Porsche. Once everything was kind of settled down and it stopped fighting the wheelies, the bike came into its own there. You know, you just rattling off the gears, and it was funny. Like if I'd got a bad start, you could just see the two cars just reeling them in, absolutely powering up beside them. So you've seen all the runs, you've seen us charging up and down the runway, having loads of fun. We end up pulling a load of data out, plugging it all into a spreadsheet. It's it's kind of surprising, it's good for the bike. Up to 60 mile an hour, it took the Porsche 2.95 seconds. It took the McLaren 3.24 seconds, and it took the bike 3.14. So actually what felt like quite a big gap was 0.3 of a second. So nothing in reality, but in terms of bragging rights, that Porsche It won the 0 to 60 test. So the bike kind of 80 mile an hour onwards, that Superleggera has got this. It's pulling away. And then what we can do is we can go 180 mile an hour at a realistic top speed. Let's end the game there. We win, bike wins, 16.77 seconds. The bike is doing 180 mile an hour. Just have a think about it for a second. 16.7 seconds and you're doing 180 miles an hour. That is insane. At that point, the Ducati was in the lead, but sure enough, a few seconds later, that McLaren comes absolutely howling past. The top speed of the McLaren, 207 miles an hour that McLaren got to, which is just insane. You know, that is an unreal number of speed. And again, the Porsche, 202 miles an hour. The standing mile speed, so race over a mile, bike won that too. 25.44 seconds to do a mile. Depending on what race you opt for, everyone won. Porsche quickest to 60, bike quickest everywhere else. McLaren tops it once we get past 192. Could look at it happy families, like everybody won one bit, but obviously we actually know the bike won it all because the bike's best. We win. Hooray!
In 2016, Ducati introduced the Multistrada Enduro, a 1200cc version of the already very good Multistrada road bike, but with more and added go-anywhere pretension. We rode the bike in Wales a couple of years ago, cut to me now, wobbling around on a big white bike. The thing was massive, 30-litre tank, 19-inch front wheel, sump guard, loads of off-road tools. It was packed full of the kind of software that guys like me need to be able to get on off-road. But unfortunately for the majority of the target market, it was packed with so much stuff that it was too big. So what Ducati has done is gone down the less is more principle for this all-new 2019 1260 variant of the Multistrada Enduro. So what does less is more mean? Well, what Ducati has done is reduce the seat height by 10mm. It's down to 860 as the standard version. You can get an 840 if you're even shorter in the leg and still want a ginormous bike, which it still is. 10mm lower at the pegs. They've shaved a centimetre of rubber out of the foot pegs to just help you find the floor a little bit easier when you're taking your feet off the pegs. And also the bars are 30mm lower than the 1200 Multi-Enduro. So it's not only the ergonomics that have been reduced, they've also taken 15mm of travel out of both the fork and the shock. That doesn't make it any harder to do anything that you would want to do with this bike off-road. It just makes the thing a little less imposing on the side stand and a bit easier to get off and on. So with all the weight saving that Ducati has done, and it's not a huge amount, they've managed to trim the ready-to-ride weight down, all up with fuel, to 254 kilos. Yes, that is a huge amount. It is an incredibly heavy bike, but at the same time, it does have the ability to ride pretty much anywhere. And I know there are stacks of people out there in YouTube land, for instance, who have something to say about whether a bike is any good or not off-road based on how much it weighs. I actually picked up my phone and texted everybody's old mate Charlie Borman with the question of how fat is too fat when it comes to riding off-road. His round-the-world BMW that he rode with that guy out of Star Wars years ago was 300 kilos plus when he left London, and he seemed to do a pretty good job rattling down the road of bones in Russia in the snow, having loads of fun. So just to answer that question, I don't think there is a minimum weight limit or a maximum weight limit when you want to ride a bike off-road. There isn't anybody waiting with a set of scales who's going to weigh your bike and say, oh no, too heavy, go home. It doesn't exist. You can either ride off-road or you can't. This bike can definitely ride off-road. How do I know? Well, I finally got to take up Beppe Guellini's offer of a trip out to Florence to the DRE.
I wait you in Italy for the Enduro in Ipozzano.
You heard that? Picture Wales, but beautiful. Picture a grey sky but blue and with this funny yellow ball in the sky. We went off and rode 80 kilometres off-road before we took any pictures. A proper off-road test for any bike, like, let alone a 250 kilogram Panigale on stilts. So you can spec your 1260 Enduro with one of two Pirelli Scorpion tyres. The off-road version is the Rally, the big knobbly one that we tried in the morning on the off-road section. In the afternoon, we jumped on the Pirelli Scorpion Trail, the road-ready rubber. Ducati has worked on the design of those spoked rims. They do look tricky as you like, they are tubeless, and in the off-road section, the Rally tyres that the bike came on made absolute mincemeat of what we were doing. But it is worth noting that within about 15 or 20 minutes of leaving our base, this beautiful castle, one of the other riders had already smashed the front wheel off a big rock and suffered a puncture. Something to consider if you are genuinely planning on buggering off into the middle of nowhere on your own on one of these bikes. So as with most Ducatis that you can buy now, there is a stack of rider modes to choose from, and with multi-enduro it made sense to go in the off-road mode. Now in off-road mode, with the engine setting on low, we're capped at 100 horsepower and you get stacks of assistance, loads of ABS, loads of traction control, and it feels like a very easy bike to just basically sit on and look like you know what you're doing. I quite quickly realised that I wanted a little bit more spin at the back and maybe would have liked a little bit more power to just see me up some of the steeper and more difficult to ride sections of our off-road loop. So I had the medium map and I was in off-road mode. So there I was, 255 kilos, having loads of fun in the middle of Florence in the sunshine. So one thing on that, riding off-road in the middle of nowhere in Florence, if you're expecting beautiful drone shots and lots of ride-bys in the off-road sections, you're not going to see them. Most of our off-road footage is chest or helmet mounted because we just couldn't get a cameraman where we went on these bikes. So one of the other tweaks that Ducati has made to this new bike is shortening the overall gearing and shortening first gear in particular. So not only have they added about 17% more torque at 5,500 revs over the 1200 version of this bike, but also they've made that torque easier to get at, particularly when you're off-road, by making first gear a little bit shorter and more suitable to punching your way over gravelly kind of beautiful Italian hillsides or just bouncing up the curb outside your garage. So one of the better things about this bike for me when I was off-road was knowing that there was all of those rider aids there to take care of me. So the Bosch 6-axis IMU offers witchcraft levels of on-road ability. We'll get to that when we come to it, cornering ABS, all that weird stuff. But it also works off-road in as much as the wheel speed sensors picking up on what the back wheel's doing, allowing you that spin when you need it, the ABS mode allowing me to skid the back wheel when I need it, but still having ABS at the front. It makes off-road riding as easy as possible. Off-road section finished, into our private castle, had a lovely lunch, and came out ready to ride the roads for the afternoon. The big differences in the afternoon was the bike was fitted with trail tyres, had huge panniers, and it had a shorter screen. It's kind of the road-going setup for Multistrada Enduro. One thing that's interesting and worth noting is we made absolutely no changes to the suspension. It's got the Sachs semi-active suspension system on it, so you literally can boing your way off-road from a motorway and the suspension is making adjustments as it goes and it can cope with wherever you want to ride. Ridiculously, within that, there are over 400 parameters that you can play with to help set this system up to suit you perfectly. But if you just left it alone, trust that you can go anywhere on it and this weird semi-active thing will do everything for you. There are a host of other adjustable bits and pieces that this bike comes with. All of it visible through this very easy to read kind of 5-inch TFT screen. It looks trick as you like, and it's also a lot easier than old Ducati systems to navigate through with a little joystick down here on the left-hand side of the bars. That's me adjusting stuff, by the way. Look, I'm adjusting. Funny old thing, the bike is incredibly capable on road. It's a Ducati. It's not going to be rubbish on road at all, is it? But let's not forget again, that weight, 250 odd kilos, and the fact that it's got a 19-inch front wheel. It is a big front wheel, regardless of what tyre you put on it. It feels a little bit lazy if you're jumping from like a sports naked or even a sports bike. Things do take a little bit of adjusting. You do have to get your head around the idea that you've got loads of leverage through those big wide bars, but also you're pushing and pulling a slightly bigger front wheel than normal around. It was on the road for me that all of the tech that this bike has really came to life. That cornering ABS, cornering lights, seamless quick shifter up and down the gearbox, hill hold control, anti-wheelie control, everything control. It's just got loads and loads of tech on it. But I didn't ever really feel like it was intrusive. Not once did the ABS cut in too early. It was only when I was dicking around that the traction control and anti-wheelie got in the way. You can ride this bike much quicker than you think based on looks alone, and also when you are trying to ride it fast, it's quite good fun knowing that you can get away with a lot, knowing that all these little safety nets are surrounding you and keeping you safe. So one thing I did find on the way down that kind of clutchless downshift assist gearbox was that from third to second on the brakes, every now and then the bike would jump out of gear on the way into corners. Firstly, it's important to note that this was my first day on a bike and it takes time for you to adjust to the shift of any bike. Secondly, these are the first run of production for Ducati, and I'm sure, as they reassured me, by the time it gets to the stage that you buy yours off the showroom floor, everything will be fine. Such a punchy and urgent motor, it was great fun getting hold of it and being able to use torque or power anywhere in the rev range in any one of the gears that I was in. The motor has come from ex-DRL, and it's also the one that we'll see in next year's DRL. 1260 DVT. There's lots to talk about in terms of how good it is, but one of the key points that the guys at Ducati wanted to make to me, and one that they really wanted to celebrate, was the service cycle interval. Again, there's this notion that Ducatis are clunky old ditch pumps that break whenever they can and they chuck belts everywhere. That's not quite the case with them anymore. If you're not aware, the service cycles are 9,000 and 18,000 miles. So 9,000 for a minor service, 18,000 for the valve clearances and a major service. Chances are, and Ducati are fully aware of the fact, that these bikes will possibly make their way to their second or third owner before they'll even need that first 18,000 mile service. So even with the adjustable screen in this bike on the lowest setting, there was this slightly cosseted feeling that I got once I was in the bike. There's bits of it all the way around you. It doesn't feel big. Well, it does feel big, but it doesn't feel big. What I'm trying to say is, despite all of that size, it is a fun bike to ride. It does enjoy being thrown around. Those Brembo brakes, monoblock M432s, are ridiculously good. It just does everything that you want a big tall bike to do, probably better than you think it should. So at the end of a sweet day on the bike, off-road and on, I was left with two questions. The first one is, would I own one? Well, I can answer that straight away by saying I can't afford it myself. 17,755 quid for the base model, all the way up to 19,800 and something for the all-singing, all-dancing, full touring spec version. I'd choose my non-existent bike that I can't afford in the desert cam colour rather than the red. And the last question I had to ask myself is, how much does it cost to repair one of these things when you drop them? I spoke to Beppe, the guy that runs DRE Italy, the guy that does all of the off-road training with Ducati, and surprisingly enough, he said it's the simple stuff that you would break on any bike if they fall over. So you're going to do a clutch lever, you might do a gear lever, you might do an indicator. But the shape of these bikes and the profile that they have on either side means that unless you absolutely barrel roll the thing and smash it to a million pieces, you're only really going to nick the edges off the normal stuff that you would have to replace with everything else. So if you're in the market for a super adventure bike, it's almost irrelevant what the guys from BMW and KTM are doing with theirs. It's largely irrelevant how expensive they are. They're all quite expensive bikes to buy. If you're a Ducati fan at heart, this is going to be the bike for you. Not only will it justify its fairly hefty price tag, it's a true adventure bike in every sense, but Ducati have just managed to do that one thing that they seem to do better than all the others, and that's being able to do these things in style.
Bye.